It was one of those long, blistering afternoons in mid-July, when even the air feels like it's holding its breath. The heat pressed against the windows of our quiet ranch house in rural Arizona, and the hum of cicadas outside was the only sound breaking, the stillness. My name is Kara. I'm 21, and I was home alone with my stepdad, Vince. My mom had gone to her cousin's cabin for the weekend, something she did every now and then when she needed a break from the heat and the noise. I remember feeling both relaxed and slightly on edge. There was something about being alone with Vince that made me wonder how the weekend would unfold. Vince, 44, was usually quiet and reserved, but that day he seemed different. Lighter, maybe even playful. He cracked more jokes than usual, lingered in the kitchen when I was cooking, and offered to hang out for the evening. "How about a movie?" he suggested, walking into the living room with a sly smile that didn't match his usual tone. Maybe something with a little spice. I laughed, unsure whether he was joking or testing the waters. Sure, boodenly if there's popcorn involved. We ended up watching a romantic drama, one of those films full of long stares and soft whispers with tension. Building in every scene as we settled into the couch, the air conditioning hummed weakly in the background, barely pushing back the heat. I could feel the sweat on my skin, and I noticed Vince glance at me during one of the more passionate scenes. At first I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just uncomfortable, but the way his eyes lingered made my heart beat a little faster. I tried to keep my attention on the screen, but it was no use. I was suddenly aware of how close we were, sitting how his arm brushed mine every now. And then, the tension wasn't just in the movie. It was in the room, thick and heavy. I shifted in my seat, trying to find a way to ignore it, but it clung to him like the heat. Then, just as the film reached its most intense moment, a knock at the door jolted us both. My breath caught. Vince looked at me quickly and held up a hand. "Stay here," he whispered, but I was already tiptoeing to the door, curiosity getting the better of me. I peeked out the window and let out a sigh of relief. It was our neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, holding a basket of cookies. "Hi, Kara," she chirped as I opened the door. "Bro goodies for you and your dad. Thought you could use a treat in this heat." "Thanks, Mrs. Caldwell," I said, managing a polite smile as I accepted the basket. She stepped inside, just a little chatting about the weather and her garden, but behind me, I could feel Vince watching us. His posture had changed. He was fidgeting slightly, his face tense like something had been interrupted. When Mrs. Caldwell finally left, the silence she left behind was almost louder than her voice had been. Vince looked at me, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. "Do you ever think about what it would be like if it was just us here all the time?" Hesked quietly. I turned to him, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" Hes stepped a little closer. The space between us charged with unspoken thoughts. "I know it's not right," he murmured. "But sometimes I feel things I can't explain. I try to stop it, but I can't help it." My heart was racing now. I should have said something to stop him, to break the moment, but I was frozen in place, caught in the gravity of his words. Was he really saying what I thought? He was before either of us could speak. Again, my phone buzzed on. The table, I grabbed it like a lifeline and glanced at the screen. A message from Mom. "Heading back early. Be home tonight. Can't wait to see you both." Panic flashed in Vince's eyes, and he stepped back. "We need to act normal," he said, his voice suddenly clipped. "Nothing happened." I nodded. But the truth was, something had happened. Even if nothing physical occurred, there had shifted between us. I felt it in the way we avoided eye contact, in the nervous laughter we shared as we tried to go back to watching the movie, but the tension didn't fade. It hung there, like the heat impossible to ignore. Later, when Mom finally walked in, smiling brightly and chatting about her weekend, I felt like I was standing on a fault line. She was completely unaware, but the ground beneath us had already begun to crack. "What did you two do while I was gone?" she asked casually. Vince and I exchanged a glance, then laughed. "Too loud, too forced. Just watched a movie," I said, smiling as best I could. But deep down, I knew things would never be quite the same again. The days after Mom returned passed like a strange dream, normal on the surface but thick with an energy. Couldn't ignore. Vince acted as though nothing had changed, but I saw the way he avoided looking at me for too long, and when our eyes did meet, there was a flicker like a memory trying to rise to the surface before being pushed back down. I tried to focus on my usual routine, catching up on summer classes, helping Mom with groceries, watering the wilting plants outside. But no matter how hard I tried to stay busy, I kept going back to that moment on the couch. The tension. The words we never fully said. One evening about a week later, the three of us were gathered in the living room. Mom had made tacos and we were watching a light comedy she'd picked. She leaned into Vince, laughing at the TV, and he chuckled along, but I saw it. A glance. Not just any glance. Vince looking at me with that same storm behind his eyes. His stomach turned and flipped. It was brief, but powerful enough that I had to look away. Later that night, after Mom went tubed, I wandered into the living room, hoping to clear my head. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe space, maybe silence. But instead, I found Vince sitting alone on the couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring blankly at the muted television. "Oh," I said, pausing in the doorway. "Didn't know you were still up." He looked over, startled, then smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep, you Sam, eh?" I murmured, stepping in. I sat down, across from him on the recliner, keeping a careful distance. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. The soft glow of the TV cast shifting, light across his face. "Kara," he said finally, his voice low. "Have you been thinking about that day?" My breath caught. "Yeah," I said, my voice just as soft. "I have." He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly struggling with something inside him. I shouldn't have said what I did, or acted the way I did. It was wrong. I looked down at my hands, twisting my fingers, but it didn't feel, I don't know, it didn't feel fake. That's the part that's messing with me. His eyes met mine, then, and the silence swelled again. Not tense this time, just full. Heavy with truth neither of us had dared to fully admit. It didn't feel fake to me either, said. My heart thudded in my chest. I didn't know what I wanted from this conversation. Clarity, maybe. Closure. But hearing him say it out loud made it real. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "Me neither," he replied. "But we can't pretend it didn't happen." I nodded slowly. "Do you think we should talk about it more? Or just let it go?" He leaned forward, setting the glass down. "I think, if we keep pretending, it'll eat at us." I swallowed, trying to fight the whirlwind inside me. "But what if it's something we shouldn't touch?" He looked at me carefully, his eyes serious. "That's why we're talking. Just talking." I hesitated, then slowly moved from the recliner to sit on the opposite end of the couch. The distance was still there, but it felt different. Like a bridge had started to form between us. We sat in silence for a long time, and eventually Vince leaned back, letting out a long breath. "We'll keep it between us. No one else needs to know." I nodded. "I understand." The conversation didn't end with a decision. There were no rules, no promises. But something had shifted again, this time with intention. We weren't ignoring the current pulling between us, and I more. Then out of nowhere, a knock at the front door made us both jump. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Vince got up cautiously and walked to the door. I stayed seated, tense. When he opened it, a familiar voice rang out. "Hey, sir, please." My heart sank. It was Aunt Melanie Mom's younger sister, dragging in an overnight bag with a huge grin on her face. Just couldn't stay away. Thought I'd pop in and spend a couple days with my favorite niece and her parents. I felt the tension whip back into the room like a slap of cold wind. Vince looked back me quickly, panic flickering in his eyes before he forced a smile. "That's great. Come on in." Aunt Melanie bustled into the house, kicking off her sandals and chatting about her drive. I stayed frozen on the couch, the fragile moment Vince and I had just shared, completely shattered as she moved into the guest room. Vince sat down beside me again, his voice low. "This complicates things." "No kidding," I whispered, heart still racing. We shared one last look, a glance filled with the weight of everything we couldn't say. The next few days felt like a performance. We hadn't rehearsed for Aunt Melanie's sudden visit, turned the house into a stage, and Vince and I became actors pretending nothing had happened. Every morning I woke up, wondering if she'd somehow sensed something was off, if our stolen glances or awkward silences had given us away. But Melanie, ever the cheerful spirit, seemed completely oblivious. At breakfast, she filled the air with chatter, talking about her coworkers, the latest gossip from her yoga class, and how quiet things seemed around here. Vince laughed at her stories a bit too hard. I stirred my coffee and nodded at the right moments, my insides twisting each time my eyes met his across the table. That evening she suggested a board game night, and we all gathered in the living room. The air was warm, thick from the lingering heat and the tension we were trying to bury. Melanie brought out snacks and set up the game. Vince sat on one side of me, and every time his arm brushed mine, it felt like a spark lit beneath my skin. I tried to stay focused on the game, but it was impossible to ignore how aware we were of each other. As the night wore on, and Melanie's yawns became more frequent, she finally stood up and stretched. "All right, folks, I'm calling it. Got to get some sleep before I crash right here on the couch." We all said goodnight, and I waited until I heard the soft click of the guest room door before I turned to Vince. He was still sitting beside me, silent. "We need to talk," he said. His voice hushed. I nodded and led him down the hall to my room, carefully shutting the door behind us. We sat on the edge of the bed side by side, neither of us saying anything at first. "She's going to notice eventually," I whispered. "You know," he said, "we have to be more careful." There was a beat of silence before he added, "But we also need to figure this out. It's not going away." I looked at him, feeling my heart tighten. "What are we even doing, Vince?" "I don't know," he admitted. "No, I know. Is that I can't stop thinking about you, about that day." "Me too," I breathed. His hand moved to mine, resting lightly on top. "I know this isn't simple. I know what this looks like, but I'm not trying to pressure you. I just need to be honest. I feel the same," I said, my voice trembling, "but I'm scared of what this could become." "Then we don't rush anything," he said. "We take it slow. We keep it between us. Just us," I nodded, unsure if I was agreeing out of emotion or fear. But in that moment, his touch felt grounding, safe. We stayed like that, sitting quietly together until a sudden knock at the door jolted us. Melanie's voice rang out, chipper and suspicious, all at once. "Hey, are you two all right in there? Everything okay?" I shot Vince a panicked look before responding. "Yeah, just talking." "All right," she said, through the door, "just checking." We both exhaled in unison. Vince stood up and moved toward the door, lowering his voice. "She's not going to leave anytime soon." "Then we need to stay careful," I said. "No more close calls." He nodded, and we turned to our separate rooms, the weight of secrecy pulling us deeper into the quiet night. The next afternoon, Melanie went into town to pick up a few things, giving us a rare moment alone. I found Vince at the kitchen table sipping his coffee and reading the paper. "Can we talk?" I asked. He looked up immediately, concern etched into his face. Of course, he sat down, my hands trembling slightly. "I don't want to keep hiding like this." He lowered the paper. "Neither do I, but I also don't want to hurt anyone. Especially your mom?" I looked down at my lap. "So what do we do?" He hesitated before answering. "Maybe we take one small step. Just one, and then we decide." I met his gaze, heart pounding. "What kind of step?" "Just a kiss," he said carefully. "No pressure. But maybe it'll help." You understand what this really is. I froze for a second, then gave the smallest nod. We leaned in. The distance between us, closing until the front door slammed. "Open, hello," Melanie's voice rang out. Forgot my wallet. We jumped apart. Like magnets reversed, I stood up quickly, my heart racing. "Kitchen." I called out, trying to sound normal. She appeared in the doorway moments later, grinning. "Caught you both being quiet." "That's rare." We laughed nervously. "Just talking," then said. She grabbed her wallet and waved back in a bit as the door closed behind her. I turned to Vince, breathless. "We can't keep doing this." He looked at me, expression unreadable. "Then maybe we stop hiding." After that close call with Aunt Melanie, everything between Vince and me felt even more fragile. We walked on eggshells, trying to maintain a facade of normally while avoiding the minefield of emotions building beneath the surface. But something had shifted. The idea of hiding, of pretending nothing was happening, was starting to feel unbearable. One evening, as Melanie showered and Mom was out running errands, I found Vince and Thegeridge organizing old boxes. The air was thick with dust and heat, but when he saw me, he set down what he was holding and wiped his hands on a rag. "We should talk," I said quietly. Stepping inside, he nodded. Already, knowing what I meant, I perched on a workbench and looked at him. Heart thudding, I can't keep living like this, carrying a secret that feels like it's pulling me apart. He leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on mine. "Neither can. I keep thinking about telling someone, about not having to sneak around anymore." "You mean telling your mom?" His voice was cautious, edged with fear. "I don't know," I admitted, "but maybe Melanie first. She's more open. Maybe she'd understand." He hesitated. "She's still your aunt, and if she tells your mom, I know the risk." I cut in. "But this what we're doing? It's too big to hide forever." Vince came closer, his voice low. "If we do this, there's no going back." I know that night after dinner, when Melanie was lounging on the patio with a glass of wine, and Mom was still out, I sat beside her. My hands were shaking. "There's something I need to tell you," I sighed. She looked at me with gentle curiosity. "What is it?" "Sweetie?" Vince appeared behind me, silent but supportive. I took a breath so deep it made my chest ache. "It's about Vince and me. Something happened. Something we didn't plan. But it's real." Melanie's eyebrows knit together. "What do you mean?" Vince stepped forward. "We've been feeling something. A connection. And we're trying to be honest about it." Her face changed instantly. Confusion, first, then shock, and then something unreadable. "You two serious?" "Yes," I said, barely above a whisper. She set their wine down slowly, her hands trembling. "I can't believe I'm hearing this." "We're not asking for approval," Vince said, gently. But we couldn't lie anymore. The silence that followed felt like it could swallow the household. "I need time." "Sheaf," Ainali said, her voice breaking. "I never saw this coming. I don't even know what to feel. We understand," I said, and meant it. But my chest still ached as she stood up and walked back inside without another word. Later that night, the house was eerily quiet. Mom was asleep, and Melanie hadn't come out of her room. Since the conversation, I sat on the couch, knees hugged to my chest, staring at the muted TV. Vince joined me, sitting close, but not touching. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No, it feels strange." "Yes, it's complicated, but not wrong. Not in my heart." He nodded, his eyes searching mine. Then we figured out together. For the first time in days, I smiled. The next morning, Melanie left early without a word. Just a note on the fridge: "Need space. I'll be in touch." I didn't blame her. When Mom came home later that evening, she was all smiles, unaware of the tidal wave just waiting offshore. We made dinner, chatted about her errands, and tried to laugh at their stories, but I could feel Vince's eyes on me all night, and I knew it wouldn't be long before we had to face the full truth. That night, as we stood in the hallway, Vince pulled me into a quiet corner. "I meant what I said," he whispered. "We face this no matter what happens. I trust you," I whispered back. And I did, even in the middle of the chaos we had invited into our lives. It rusted the bond between us. It wasn't simple. It wasn't easy, but it was ours. We sincerely thank you for joining us for today's special story. If you enjoyed it, we kindly encourage you to subscribe to our channel. Give this video a thumbs up and share your reflections in the comments below. Your continued support inspires us to bring you more meaningful and engaging stories every single day, and click on the video above to see more inspiring stories, my dear.